Okay, we're gonna take a look at this disc brake system on a front wheel drive vehicle here. First of all, we're gonna measure brake pad thickness with the brakes entirely assembled. So anytime the wheels come off the vehicle, we can get a full readout on our brakes, suspension systems, suspension components, some drivetrain components and steering components. So we're gonna be checking all those things as soon as we start rotating tires and playing musical tires around the car. So first things first, let's check out brake pad thickness. And to do that, we're going to use this brake pad feeler gauge. So this is that go, no go gauge I was talking about, where if we're in the green, we're looking good. If we're in the yellow, we need to take a look at it pretty soon. And if we're in the red, we need to service it immediately. These also have the sizes stamped in millimeters and thousandths of an inch, so we can get a actual direct measurement of the brake pad thickness. So it's pretty simple on how to use this tool. We're just going to get it in between the brake rotor and the backing plate of the brake pad, so we can get a measurement of the actual friction material on the brake pads. That's what we're worried about. All right, so let's get a little closer look at the caliper here. And then once we're done getting brake pad thickness measurements, we'll go ahead and measure the thickness of the rotor. Go from there. Okay, what we're looking at now is the inspection window in the caliper itself. We've got this kind of cutout here where we can see the inner brake pad, the brake rotor, and the backing plate here to the brake pad. So I kind of like to start with the rotor because it's the rusty looking brown part of the sandwich. And then the next layer touching the rotor is always going to be the brake pad friction material, the important part that we're going to measure or inspect. And so that's this layer right here that has the notch cut out of it. The next layer back is going to be the backing plate to the brake pad. So it's that steel brake pad backing plate that we don't want to have that make contact with our steel rotor. As we want to replace our brake pads before this friction material is below the minimum or completely disappeared. And it also has that channel cut in there as kind of a visual thickness indicator. Notice that the channel's not cut all the way through the brake pad. So if you go to inspect your brake pads and this has disappeared and it looks like one uniform layer, that's also an indicator just visually that it's time to go ahead and replace those pads. Okay, but we're going to use our feeler gauge tool to get an exact measurement of that brake pad friction material. So what I do is I kind of just pick a size that I think goes in there and see what we got. Pretty simple system here. So I picked the yellow to start with. I notice we've got a little bit of play in there. Okay, so that's a little bit too small. I'm going to go up one size from there. Back with the first level of green. And stick that in between the rotor and our friction material. Between the rotor and the backing plate, sorry. And notice that fits in there nice and snug. Okay, that's not really any play in there. So between the rotor and the backing plate, this one's looking pretty good. Can't really get any play back and forth. Okay, so I pull that out and go ahead and check out my size. That's so it's not glaring. It looks like we're looking at 8 millimeters for this brake pad. 8 millimeters. I know you can't see it. We're looking at 315 thousandths. Okay, so standard or metric, we've got both measurements. We can tell the customer exactly how much brake pad they have left down to the millimeter. All right, that takes care of the inner pad. To do the outer pad, I'm going to kind of sneak in the back down this part of the caliper. So we'll go and shift and see if we can't snag a reading from that. All right, so in this setup, I kind of do have this clip in my caliper that's a little bit in the way. But you'll notice our brake pad tool will sneak around that. And we're just trying to do the same thing here. We're trying to measure that layer between the rotor and the backing plate. Little knots down there where we're trying to get our feeler gauge. And you're going to see it, even though there's not much space there, it's going to fit just like the inside pad. Here's our first one again, the yellow. Coming in. And that's got a little bit of play between that backing plate and the rotor. So I just need to step up again like last time. And if we got 8 mm on this side and 8 mm on the inside, we've got some nice even wear going on, which is what we're looking for. Okay, so if I can feed my 8 mm feeler gauge down there. Locks right into place and I can't wiggle it back and forth. Between that backing plate of the brake pad and the rotor, got that feeler gauge locked in there. We've got 8 mm on the inside and 8 mm on the outside. Looking good in the green. Okay, next step, we're going to measure the thickness of the rotor. And that can be kind of difficult because there is this backing plate that kind of runs the circumference of the brake rotor. So you kind of go near the caliper and try and get down as far as we can into where those brake pads would be wearing away or eating away at the rotor. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and grab my micrometer and we will take a thickness measurement of our brake rotor. Okay, let's get our rotor thickness measurement. We're going to use this outside micrometer. This is a 0 to 1.5 inch mic. This will take an outside thickness reading of our rotor right here and tell us if that's above or below our minimum specification. This is a hugely important measurement. Lost my drop light there. Two reasons that we need to look at our rotor minimum thickness. Number one, if we're thinking about machining our rotors or taking off a layer to resurface these to get them nice and flat and new again, we need to make sure that we're not going below the minimum thickness. Remember, we're going to remove material off of the rotor and there's no putting that material back. So the minimum thickness is there as a very important spec and we cannot go under that. We need to discard the rotors once they reach that minimum. Also, the piston, as it comes out of its bore, further and further and further as those brake pads wear away, if we run a rotor that is thinner than the minimum thickness specification, the piston can actually come so far out of the caliper that it's possible for it to fall out. Okay, so that is a very important specification that we need to pay attention to. Cannot run rotors below the minimum thickness. To get that measurement, I'm going to take my outside mic, get as close to the brake pad area as I can. I'm kind of limited here with my access with the caliper still on, but I'm going to go as low as I can. Just run my mic down so I feel like it gets a good snug reading. Right about there. And I pull it over. Got my sleeve. Looking at 915 thousandths. Actually, my gauge is accurate here for once. We're looking at 915 thousandths of thickness on this rotor. So we're going to take that number and move to our specifications and see is that rotor within spec or are we below specification and it needs to be replaced. Okay, now that we've got both of our brake system measurements, we've measured our rotor thickness, we've got our brake pad thickness. I'm going to take those measurements to our factory service software here, and we're going to look up to see if we're within specification or if the parts need to be replaced. So I've got the car already selected. I'm going to go here to OneSearch. Go ahead and pull up disc brakes. We're going to look for specifications on disc brakes. Do the specs card here. And work my way down. Not looking for torque specifications. I'm looking for brake specifications. Not bleeding. There we go. Brake specs. And we're looking for the Eclipse. And here's my brake specs. So our minimum thickness for our rotor, you can see that kind of right here. It's listed as disc thickness minimum. So you can see our front rotor thickness is 0.88 of an inch or 880 thousandths. So we measured 915 thousandths as our rotor thickness. So we are at least above the specification. Now, whether we had enough room to machine the rotors there or not, would be a different story, because we've got to remember that we're going to take some material off. So we don't want to end up below the minimum thickness after doing all that work with machine rotors. So we're kind of close, but we've got around 20 thousandths or so, 25 thousandths above the minimum for the rotor. And if I scroll down a little bit, I'm sure I can find the brake pad thickness. So here's our pad lining thickness. And we are looking at 2 millimeters. We measured 8. See that in that specification. If I go back up top, you can see millimeters are in the percent or parentheses there. But we're well above our minimum thickness for our brake pads as well. We've got 8 millimeters and the minimum's 2. 880 thousandths for our rotor, and we're sitting at 915. So both components are within spec. Those simple measurements that we are then going to take to what the manufacturer says are the minimum specs, and make sure those parts are still good to go and okay to run. All right, I hope that was a good overview on just basic brake inspection and how simple it is to get a quick look at our brake system. Takes a couple measurements and then compare those measurements with what the manufacturer says is okay or not okay for the vehicle.